where news comes first. This is WECT News at 6.
Hey, good evening, everyone. We thank you so much for watching tonight. I'm John Evans.
I'm Frances Weller. Governor Roy Cooper has vetoed a bill to repeal the state's pistol purchase permit law and allow people to carry guns at places of worship.
The governor expressed concerns about that bill, which now goes back to the lawmakers in the General Assembly. WECT's Zach Solon heard from the governor and actually talked with a lawmaker who wrote that bill. Now, Zach, even with today's veto, that bill could still become law.
Yes, John, that's because Republicans have enough votes in the Senate to override that veto. They are one seat short in the House. This means the debate over gun purchase laws will continue. Governor Roy Cooper vetoes Senate Bill 41, legislation that would repeal the state's pistol purchase permit law. Cooper says the law ensures a step that is necessary to keep people safe.
It actually takes away an important protection where sheriffs can make decisions about issuing pistol permits that don't necessarily show up in a federal firearms check, like domestic violence, like gang membership, things like that.
However, Senator Danny Earl Britt says those federal background checks are enough, and people should not have to get approval from their county sheriff to get a gun.
A sheriff in a large county is more than likely not going to have intimate knowledge about an individual enough to be able to gauge what their moral character actually is. And those, of course, are the counties that are backed up. Those are the counties that are taking 6 months and a year to get pistol purchase permits issued.
Cooper says the state should be more concerned about protecting people, especially given the toll guns have taken on children and their families.
Death by firearm has surpassed car accidents for injury deaths among children. Now, death by firearm is the #1 cause of injury death to children. We have a problem.
Britt doesn't buy that argument, though, and feels eligible gun owners should have an easier process to buy a gun.
The claim that this law protects children or anyone else is false. There's no evidence whatsoever that supports it. All this law does is it serves to restrict Second Amendment rights of law-abiding gun owners.
Unlike previous vetoes, Governor Cooper may not have the final say as the bill heads back to the General Assembly. Britt is confident the Senate will override the governor's veto, but says getting enough votes to do so in the House will be a challenge. We'll keep you updated as this process moves forward. Zach Solon, WECT News.